place, so it's a real entrepreneurial crowd.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool.
Was that an official thumbs up, Peter?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. I'm guessing that we will continue to see a trickle in based on traffic and weather conditions today, but we'll roll with it because we're entrepreneurial and that's what we do. So I'm Jennifer Zick, moderating today's fabulous panel. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because I can't do justice on the depth of these introductions. But I'm also the founder and CEO of Authentic Brand, so we're just delighted, our team, to host today's event and to have you all here to talk about the life cycle of a brand. Before we get started, there's a few important people that I want to thank and give shout outs to, and then I'd love to have a quick word from our host here this morning. So first of all, obviously a giant thank you to our panelists who carved out time in their schedule to be here to share with you their authentic stories of building a brand, building businesses, and I think there's just nothing more beneficial than hearing from people who have walked the journey ahead of us and who've been there and done that, and all of them are still in there doing that too. So we're excited to hear from them today. So I also want to thank the Twin Cities Startup Week committee and community that has provided this platform for so many events this week. I hope this won't be the only event you attend. I hope you've got a full roster all week, and if so, I look forward to bumping elbows with you at other events throughout this week. Specifically, I want to give a shout out to Nels Peterson as the coordinator of Twin Cities Startup Week, and Marty Weatherall, who is the track leader for this sales and marketing track. Finally, I also want to thank Heibrid Marketing, who is here today providing production support so that we can live stream this event to others who couldn't make it here physically today but who wanted to partake in this content. So we will have a plethora, a library of resources coming off the conversation today if you want to share the bits and bytes with your network. I suggested it'd be great for a holiday card inclusion for any of you panelists. Link to video. So
You've never seen my holiday.
Oh no, I can imagine.
They're weird.
A shout out to my team at Authentic Brand, who's been coordinating all the aspects of communication around this event. We actually did publish a blog not long ago as a virtual panel that explores some of the topics we're going to discuss today. So you can dive in on that content as well. And finally, Field Collective. Isn't this a beautiful location and a beautiful facility? And they've opened their doors to Twin Cities Startup Week as a founding partner. And Don happens to be on our panel, which is perfect because I can throw the mic to you and you can give a little welcome and tell us a little bit about what Fuel does.
All right, I'll catch that virtual mic. Yeah, hey, welcome everybody. This is the fact that a lot of you raise your hands and self-identified as entrepreneurial is encouraging. Because essentially, you know, we're 10 years old. We used to call it Coco. Some of you might remember that. We probably will touch on that as part of this, but we recently changed our name to Fuel Collective. There's a whole story behind that, but we're still playing the same game that we have for 10 years, which is inviting entrepreneurs and self-employed people and small businesses to come and build their businesses here. And part of what makes that attractive is having other people who are going through the same crazy experience as you are, so you realize you're not alone and you're not going nuts. And making payrolls hard, and everybody else is trying to do it. So that's pretty much what we try to host every day. And some people just come and hang out at coffee tables. Some people actually bring their whole team here, and there's some really big teams actually out on the floor. And yet they still want to hang out in this kind of crazy environment. And then some people just come here for meetings, which is kind of a fun thing. If you're looking to get off site and do something, you know, just have a change of mind with your team, this is a place to do it. So two things I need to tell you about. They're really the same thing, but it's two different drawings. Drop your business card for free membership or for free meeting time. And we'll treat you extra special if you come in for either. So anyway, that's the front desk. Just make sure to get your name in the bin. Other than that, thanks for coming.
Yeah. Don, aren't you guys also doing some hosting of co-working this week during Twin Cities Startup Week? How does somebody take advantage of that?
I think you just show up and say hi at the front desk.
You just
We'll take care of you.
Hashtag Twin Cities Startup Week 18 here for free co-working. Awesome. So maybe some of you want to stick around and try out co-working. I'm going to be hanging around today and doing a little work here before I head to more meetings. So this is a great space to be productive and engaged with a broader community. So thanks so much, Don. Thank you to your team who's here supporting all the logistics so we can have this conversation today. So without further ado, I would love to just roll down the panel, have each of you, I mean, you probably don't even require introduction. You're so well known and well loved here in this community, but I would love it if you give us just the short reel of your experience and kind of the makeup of your startup fabric and entrepreneurial endeavors. So Nina, I'll start with you.
I'm Nina Hale. I founded a company that I named after myself. It's totally un-Minnesotan. And I really wish that there had been, that you had opened when I did, because I was looking for something just like that. And it went and got my own little office beforehand. Anyways, we do digital marketing. I started out doing search when not very many people were doing search. So all things Google, and we're at 85 people now. I'm no longer the CEO. We've made a almost full transition to it just being the brand, Nina Hale, and not being the person.
Nina, if I remember correctly, when I was young and aspiring to grow up to be something like you, I remember. Do I remember you riding a motorcycle into networking events and like coming in and like?
Yeah, I was riding my Ducati around. It was fun.
She was so badass.
I would go to, sometimes I'd go to client meetings in it, and like in my leathers. It was kind of fun. Although then somebody once, I was pitching Red Wing, and this was when it was just me alone. When it was just me alone, and it was so early, and I was just doing search, I was getting really big, beautiful brand name clients, and I remember I had one guy sort of, freelancing with me, and I show up for my Red Wing pitch, and I was wearing like my motorcycle stuff, and he was like, "Is that what you're gonna wear for a pitch?" And I was like, "Oh my god, I guess not." And like went home and switched into my gray suit and everything, and then they showed up and work clothes and things. So you stick true to your authentic self.
I loved it. I noticed it. You always stood out in a crowd. Always. Yeah. Thank you.
For better or worse.
Well, I wish I had taken your advice, because then I'd be here in pajamas. So, but it's funny, while you were doing that, I remember I ran into you at some of it. We were like both talking to a client, and you were there, and I was like, wow, she's doing really well. Meanwhile, I was 1/3 of a partnership, a usability, user experience partnership that ultimately didn't go very well. It was like a slow motion train wreck. It took us 10 years to realize that we had pieces missing from the business, one of which was marketing, one of which was sales. So then after that, as that went down, happened to start Coco, which was really kind of more of what would you call it, it was just like an effort of love. It was just something that like we felt needed to be done. And so that was really how we got started. That was 2010. So
I remember when you started that, and nobody understood what it was that you were doing, but it sure looked cool.
Yeah, that's what our first investors said too. I don't understand it, but I like it.
Yeah. The heart came through. Awesome. Thanks, Don. Doug.
So I'm Doug Berg. I'm a Minnetonka kid, but I've been entrepreneuring since the 80s, believe it or not, and founded a couple of internet companies here in the Twin Cities. First a consulting group called Quantum Consulting, and then a company called Techies.com, which was LinkedIn for tech folks before we knew what LinkedIn was. And then I started a group called Jobs to Web, which grew and sold to SAP. And then I did MyAlerts, which sold to a private equity firm last summer. And then now I'm doing ZapInfo. So I've got a long history of starting things, and I've probably started and shut down just as many companies. I think knowing when to shut down is just as important as knowing when to start up. And I also do a lot of angel investing. I'm on about 10 different boards of companies on both coasts, and travel. I get out of Minnesota as much as I can.
Thanks for staying put for today.
Yeah.
Thanks for staying in town for today. Awesome. Thanks, Doug.
Hey everyone, I'm Chip House, COO and co-founder of a company called Structural. We're based in St. Paul. Not quite as busy as you, Doug, I don't think, even though I'm feeling extremely busy.
You have more hair still.
Yeah. Prior to Structural, I was CMO at 451, e-commerce company here in town, and I was at Salesforce and ExactTarget prior to that, and Digital River prior to that, where I worked with Nina way back in the late 90s. I think that's it. That's pretty much me. Thanks for coming. Good to see you.
And about the same time that Nina was in her leathers and Don was beginning an initiative from the heart, I was getting an ExactTarget demo at the townhouse kitchen table of my CEO for the company that would become Magnet 360. Back then it was called Reside, and we were all virtual and in our 20s with big dreams and hopes, and met this little startup called ExactTarget. We're like, we'll resell that.
What you were employee number what?
That's 6.
Yeah,
ExactTarget.
employee number 6 at ExactTarget. So that was always you know, incredible.
Which is now the Salesforce Marketing Cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
small thing.
No. Yeah.
Awesome. So you can see why so many people wanted to hear today's content. We're going to have a depth of wisdom, not nearly enough time to extrapolate it all, but we're going to try. And I think that it won't be hard for me to bring you a panel that shines. I'm just going to sit here and let them do their stuff. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And I'm going to just lob a question out, and I invite any of you to pick it up. And I would love to hear from 2 or 3 of you on any of these topics. So just volley the ball. And I'm kicking it old school here with my printed notes. All right, so all of you have founded and grown successful businesses, some of you many times over. And your businesses have represented a really nice range. Nina and I were talking about this morning. A really nice range of services, product, enterprise level, small business, consumer to some degree with individual business buyers. So think back to your early startup days when you didn't know what the future was going to hold, but you just had a good sense, right? How would you describe in the startup days your vision, your hopes, your aspirations for your company's brand at that stage? What did you even think? Did you think about brand?
Beyond blind naivete.
I can go first. I mean, when I think about Exact Target, obviously that name was very specific to what we were trying to do, you know, create Exact Target inside the email marketing space, which was sort of nascent and very early. I remember, in fact, the early days of doing email marketing at Digital River was bribing our tech staff to send Unix mail with whiskey, basically. You know, so
The
when-
amount of bribe,
Yeah.
food and drink bribes there.
Yeah,
is crazy.
thinking bribes works also if you don't have a WYSIWYG email editor. But you know, speaking more current at Structural, you know, it was actually named by our VC about the time we were joining, and they had bought Structural.ai, and you know, Scott and I were just kicking off the business. One of the first things we wanted to do is get a regular domain, and so we went acquired Structural.com, which seemed, I don't know if it was a bright idea or not, to be honest, but people were still struggling with anything that wasn't .com. You know, what is this .ai thing? Is that a real URL? Can I go there? You know, but relative to branding, you know, and I'll probably talk about this more later. I think you don't know what you're doing relative to brand earlier. You kind of pick a name and you try to do business. And you know, early on, I think what you need to do is stay true to growing your business and starting to get customers, and then they'll start to reflect your brand back at you as you kind of become who you're going to be. Does that make sense?
When we started, which worked because we were just one space. We were a location in Lower Town St. Paul. We were inviting people to come hang out. We could call it, hey, we're doing a co-working thing. And eventually I had a good friend who gave us some naming options, and we picked this one. She said, no, you don't want that one. She pointed us over to Coco, which seemed a little weird at first, but we went with it. But I think kind of reflecting on what you said, I think eventually I wouldn't like lose too much sleep over the naming of something, as eventually it just becomes, it's imbued with the meaning that comes from people's experience with you and what you provide them and how they feel about it.
Yes.
So eventually it's kind of like naming a kid, you know? They'll just become that name.
Yes.
So, you know? Yeah,
For better or for worse.
Dexter, yeah. I'd rather put more into the delivery of whatever it is I'm providing, or just explaining the vision, you know?
Yeah.
And then,
I think that's a really great point because, I mean, obviously I thought it was just going to be me working part-time. But I really stressed over my tagline, and that was drive revenue from online channels. And in the entire 13 years of the company, the only thing that has changed is that we've changed it to sort of drive revenue from digital channels. And so kind of coming up with, as you were saying, what that main brand concept is was a lot more important, you know, at least to me at the time, than the name itself.
That's brilliant. And I can weigh in as an entrepreneur just over 18 months into the authentic brand journey. When I named the business, I had a fuzzy idea of what the company would do. I knew I wanted to work with the SMB market, the 5 to 50 million, help them build marketing muscle, figure out how to navigate that transition from being a sales-driven organization to a marketing-driven, and I knew we would provide services in that fuzzy realm. And then the first 6 months was like testing hypotheses and asking for input and getting feedback from the market on what these companies would value, and then having an aha moment about how so many of those businesses run on EOS, and what they really needed was to develop marketing traction. And so the story built itself through exploration, and I'm sure some of you in the room who are entrepreneurs can understand how that happens too. And I think part of our conversation today might be about, as the business evolves, how do you keep extrapolating?
The only thing I'd add is, I think for most entrepreneurs in the early day, as long as you're the pitch man,
Yeah.
so whatever name you pick, resonating, are you getting the feedback? Because I've seen entrepreneurs, they'll end up, butchering the name. That's where you can stumble a lot, whereas because you get to try your pitch on wrong positioning or something like that. And I used to hate it in the beginning, and now it's the perfect testing ground. So
That's awesome. And you just segued perfectly into our next question, which I'll lob back to you, and then we can ping pong it up. So, Doug, I know because I've watched you through your career, and I've also read a recent article where you commented on this, that some of Tell us a little bit. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, brand vision changed as your company grew, and then you talked about being careful not to outsource that vision early on, but could carry the baton once that message was clear.
yeah. So look, I mean, as a startup founder, you're delusional a bit, and you over-own or think you have a really good opinion about what you think your company name needs to be, what your story is. And so my first business, Job Keys, I toiled endlessly. What should the name be? Oh, it's the key to getting a job, right? And the internet was just coming out, it's a keyboard. And so, but we got to a point where it was just a bad name, and it didn't tell us a story. And we were starting to niche very much into the technology vertical. And so at that point, Digital Pulp from New York and all these big agencies, and I sat through, renaming pitch after pitch after pitch from companies, and they would literally dress people up like they wanted our business so bad because we had because tech guys really love, and we've surveyed people, and they would bring a big bumblebee character in and try to pitch us on stuff. And the whole time as a founder, I'm again trying to detach myself and say, is this really as stupid as I think it is? Because you burn all night looking for domain names, right? And I had actually found the domain techies.com, and I thought to myself, that's like owning the name Kleenex, for the identity of who my audience is. And after we listened to all the big ad agencies pitching us, I had to call the board from some hotel somewhere because we were opening 30 markets, and I just said, I literally bought the domain for $3,000 on my personal credit card, and said, I'll quit as the founder if you guys just have. I said, here's what I did. I said, have all the agencies stop what they're doing, stop with their name generation, take this name and come back and pitch us with what you would do with that name. It was brilliant. I mean, we didn't know which agency to pick after we'd given them that direction. And it was an amazing way to just hang on to the founder's position on certain things, but then let the agencies do what they do really well, which is to create the story and the brand and everything around it. So, but always be willing to pivot. You'll know when there's frustration in your sales teams and in your marketing efforts, and even in your customer base. If they can't explain what you do back to you, or you hear them struggle about it, you've got to do something. So
that's awesome. Thank you. Nina, tell us a little bit about what the journey looked like to evolve your business from being Nina Hale the person to Nina Hale the company.
Well, we're a services company, and so that actually, as we started to grow, and the first couple of years I actually really fought against hiring. I didn't want to be responsible for keeping other people alive, and it was scary to me, but and so I didn't. But then we did around 2007, 2008 started hiring and sort of have added, I don't know, about 15 people per year since then. And along the way, where I wasn't involved in every pitch, which you're right, in the beginning, especially as a services company, being able to sell the work and do the work is super helpful. And you need to be able to do both. Some people you can get more money, you've got a partner or different things. But so along the way, sort of making that shift from it being about Nina and being about the company and the team became really important because it wasn't, people would say, oh, I want you on this project. And I would say, you actually don't want me because this other person is really, really good. And so kind of making that shift to understand it and becoming more process driven as a company and saying, we have very specific processes, we have very specific training, we are working in teams. It's not one person who's executing everything. We're working in a team together. And so really trying to understand and make that shift so that clients trusted the company and the process and the standards that we set, rather than saying, I'm associated with one person. And so that was sort of the big shift for us over the years on that, was making that move towards it, saying, I'm trusting the company and the process, not any one individual.
But that transfer of trust, in order for that to be successful, has to be backed up with process, repeatability, scale, right? So all of that
scale and trust in the results. I mean, we're a performance-driven company. It is 100% about did these people make me money? And so you back it up by saying, yeah, we made you money. Guess what? We made you this much more money than anybody else ever has. And so then the trust goes and says, and we shifted these people along the way. You may have had different team members along the way, but your results were always, there was always a process and stability in what you're receiving from us.
Yeah, nice.
So.
Well, and Don, this local market fell in love with your effort from the heart to build Coco. And that brand has had just tremendous attachment in this community. I wasn't even a coworker and I loved Coco, even before I ever got inside of a building. I just loved that brand. And so recently, your business has made a pretty big pivot in its strategy and brought on a new name. Can you talk to us about what that transition has been like and what you've learned through that?
Yeah, it's so what's happened in co-working, and nobody could have seen it because 10 years ago it was just a movement. It was like a bunch of hippies, renting a space and then inviting their friends in and hoping they could get a few coins for it. We did, because Kyle, my co-founding partner, we both had kids who needed to go to college. We were like, this can't be a hobby. This has to be a business that actually gets us somewhere. So we took it seriously as a business. And but what happened in the really quickly, was a crap ton of really well-funded competition showed up. They did first everywhere else, and then eventually here. And when it came here, it came in like spades. People who are spending funny money and don't have to be sustainable. But we've been sustainable since day one, and so we run by different rules. Like, there's some cracks in the floor here. We're not going to get to fixing them. It's not worth our effort. If you go down the street, they might have beautiful gleaming floors that they paid, $150 a square foot for. So that's a challenge as a business. Is suddenly, the first mover advantage a lot of times is not always an advantage. But so what we ended up doing was thinking about how we could grow and get past that. What we lighted upon was the idea of a business that's not just co-working, it's not just people coming for officing, but having a hospitality component, which is to say, like, having events and catered meetings in a bar, and really making it so that you could run it all shifts of the day into the weekend, as opposed to 8 to 5, which is what we currently do. So that ended up being turned into a franchise concept, and we partnered with a couple other people. it came to voting time about what to do with the name. What do we call this thing? We have the concept, the structure, we have the pro formas and everything. What do we call it? And we lost the vote on what to call it. We were advocating for cocoa, and they're like, you know what? Outside of your market, cocoa doesn't mean anything. So let's just look at all the opportunities or all the options. So we ended up with Fuel Collective, and so we kind of had to put our big kid pants on and go like, all right, that's what we're calling ourselves. But what it meant was we had to basically take this name and introduce it to people who were in love with the cocoa name. We had 2 years to mourn this. It was a 2-year process to do this.
Internally.
Internally,
for
yeah,
those
yeah.
of you in the know.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
The rest of us were like,
Yeah, and as you
Cocoa
explained,
changed its
you've
name.
explained to us, you know, that like, yeah, you're over this, but everybody else is just kind of getting used to it, so you better help people with the transition. So we had we're still in the midst of a transition, really, for people to go like, okay, I guess you're still the same for the most part. Now, I think once we haven't yet brought the full model in yet. That might be a few months off. But once we have the bar, and you walk in and you go, oh, I get it. This is more like working in a hotel lobby. I think that's going to really help people, you know, make the full transition.
Connect.
Yeah, so it's almost like we now have a new concept, but we have to introduce the full service so
Yeah.
people can marry that with the concept.
Yeah, it's important to recognize that when big decisions and pivots are made and the internal team has time to adapt and absorb and go through the 5 stages of grieving and acceptance or whatever those are, that the market still needs to be brought along in that conversation as well. So that's a great story. And Chip, I would love to hear from you. I mean, no small thing to have your startup business acquired by Salesforce.com. And having been a customer of ExactTarget and a partner to ExactTarget and also at Magnet a partner to Salesforce.com, kind of got to see that happen from the inside ring. But I would love for you to share that story of what that looked like and how did you partner with the acquiring teams to thread that along so that customers felt they understood that change.
Yeah, wow. So let me take you back to the beginning again, because when I think about what you said, Nina, it blows me away, actually, that your tagline barely changed in 13 years, because I think that is not the norm, and maybe when you're naming your company after yourself, you have more control for that. But there's a, I would say, fall in love with nothing, just expect adaptability, because, your name is important, but it's only so important. And I mean, with structural, we're probably on our 5th tagline, I think early on, and probably our 5th market, frankly, too, and persona that we're targeting, But early on at ExactTarget, we were too dumb to even know what persona meant, probably. So,
nobody was talking personas then.
But what we did, if you're going to fall in love with anything, fall in love with selling things, And so I think what we did early on at ExactTarget was, stuck our finger up and we're like, yeah, we're getting reaction to this message, we're selling things, we're starting to be able to move up market with that message, and then we took it national, so we hired salespeople across the country and told the same message in every market, and so that expansion, I think, because we were an underdog, I think there were 40 different email service providers that were started in 2000, 2001, and we are still kind of a little guy there, and so we kind of committed to that strategy, SaaS software, which by the way wasn't called SaaS at that point, trying to empower the little guy to do it on their own, but also building out a national sales team to continue to move up market. And so the other thing I would say is we always had this strategy called on the shoulder of giants, and so starting to build relationships with Salesforce, with Expedia, with Microsoft. That process started in like 2002, I think, and they didn't begin to bear fruit until 2007, so it was like 5 full years of, is this worth it? We're flying to Seattle a lot, is that good? And so it's costing us money, and so by the time Salesforce came around and acquired us, we had already gone public in 2012, and it was 2013. And it felt honestly really long in the tooth at that point. Like, this is never going to happen, and it felt like they were falling in love with things more like Marketo and that were more in kind of the B2B space, frankly. So in terms of what that was like, we had an amazing culture at ExactTarget, and I would have loved to have the core of that company here, frankly, because it did amazing things for Indianapolis. If you were in Indianapolis 15 years ago versus there now, it's just such a market difference. you know, the circle is right down there, and there's the Salesforce Tower, which blows my mind, you know. Sorry, this is a long answer to your
I
question.
love it, it's a great story.
We're with you.
All right. And so when you go from 2,000 people to 20,000, you know, from the acquiring company, they come in and they were nice to us for a while, you know. You know, it's kind of cute, you have that business, you know. And they seemed to draft off of us and let us have our market for about a year, but then they came in and they brought in the people to figure out what we were doing and change it over to kind of the Salesforce model. And that actually was a tough process, but it was a really great process, because I'm still so impressed with Salesforce and the culture that they've maintained with 20,000 people and what they've done for San Francisco, frankly. But actually part of that experience was some of the initial kernel ideas for structural. So going from 2,000 to 20,000, wow, now we're this huge global team. Who are all these people? We had just brought on Buddy Media and Radiant 6 and Pardot, so we had multiple brands in the mix. We were trying to figure out who are all these people and what do they do? And that was, you know, the idea for software that would let you know who's who and what their strengths were.
Oh, awesome. What great stories. Thank you all for sharing with some depth. I think that's really helpful to hear, you know, how the painting comes to life in all these different scenarios. So along the way, was there ever a point where, you know, we talked already about the importance of, as the founder, staying connected to the pitch, if your services firm, to the services or the delivery of the product, staying connected, and then as you grow, you know, entrusting that narrative and that story and that brand to other people, whether it be a national sales team or a marketing agency or an internal team. As you made those leaps of extending that brand, you know, baton to others to carry, was there ever a time where the story got off the rails, like took on a life of its own, or maverick sales rep on the West Coast went wild? Was there ever a time when the story just spun a little out of control or a little off center and you had to bring it back around?
No, never.
Let us learn from you then.
I want to hear from Doug.
So probably the biggest scaled effort that I've been a part of was Techies. We grew from 0 to 38 markets in 18 months. So
Whoa.
one of the good things that we discovered early is that every major television station in the country wanted to have an internet strategy, where the newspapers owned the recruiting game with print ads. So we called WCCO, they had just launched with internet broadcast systems, and we said, hey, do you guys wanna, you know, because they wanted $4,000 per TV commercial, which, by the way, the biggest mistake you can make, apart from a Super Bowl commercial, is trying to advertise an internet thing. One time during a Vikings game, because I literally wrote the check out of my home equity line for that too, thinking that during the Vikings game, people are going to put everything down and go sign up for Techies.com. Anyone want to guess how many people signed up?
3.
0.
0. However, we saved the TV spot and played it in every PowerPoint presentation.
That strategy still works, yes.
And when you reflect on it, I got to go to WCCO TV. I got to sit in their little "we'll help you build your TV" commercial. I got to go through the process. I had to refine my story. There was so many byproduct value parts of it, apart from the hoping 1 million people were going to sign up, that it was still a valuable investment for me, even though it didn't turn out well. So fast forward to us hiring 50 people a week.
Whoa.
50 people a week. We scaled from 0 to 800 people in 14 months. Like, we were going fast. So every Monday morning, I had to stand up and, you know, say hi to the 50 people and give the pitch the way that I'm giving the pitch, which had changed every week. But it got better and better, right? But they all got a playbook, and then they would all return back to their markets because we had an inside-outside model. But then I would be literally in a different market probably 3 times a week. I'd go from Austin to San Francisco to wherever, and ride along with our sales reps who were just butchering what they'd learned in the Monday meeting. But then I could sit side saddle with them, and I had this 3-part thing, which was, hey, if I'm coming to your market, the first 3 pitches I'm going to do and you're going to view. The next 3 pitches you're going to do and I'm going to view. And then from there, you're on your own. And it really worked beautiful as a model for us to be able to do that. And I just constantly sat in on as many pitches as I could to try to help people correct. Because the thing I learned is salespeople love to sell the thing they love to sell, not so much what the customer wants. And you always have to help your salespeople understand how this could have gone differently. And I think we're in what I call the experiential brand time versus just message and, you know, creative and stuff like that. That's old stuff. And customers, I always say there's two ways to get in the safe, right? You can either blow the thing with dynamite by just dumping and telling your whole story to a customer, or you can just ask for the combination. Tell me what your top 3 objectives are this year, and I'm gonna try to tailor our presentation to what you want. Every single time the customer will tell you exactly what the combo into the lock is, right? And when you hear consistency in that all of the time, you'd better make sure that that's what's in your marketing decks. And frankly, you need to build what I call a Lego block set so that you've got this top level identity that's always consistent, but the functional things that you do might have to change from pitch to pitch, but everybody should know how to configure that based upon the customer's starting point. So those were the gems that I learned as your brand pivots. You can always have a consistent identity, but who you are and what you do to every different customer might start in a different place, but hopefully within a year you can get them to the full solution.
It's like you're reading my script and setting up the next bat here, because that's perfect segue again into the next question. And so I would love to lob this one out. You talked there, Doug, about asking for the combination. You know, what does the customer actually want? And then as you learn that, where the patterns are, translating that back into what your product or service provides and how you bring it to market, right? So in your businesses, across any of the businesses, what tools, processes have you used to stay connected with the customers and their view of the brand? And then how has the organization used those insights to refine the go-to-market messaging strategy? Is it formal? Has it been informal? Has it been feedback from the feet on the street? Is there a process and tools? What have you seen work or not work?
There's a couple of different things. I mean, you know, as a services company or as any company, the people who hire you, it reflects upon them. And so it's really important to realize that your client, the choice that they made is a risk for them as well. And so you have to be really tuned in to, you have to have a really clear discussion with your client about how is it going, how is it working, are you getting the information that you need so that you can continue to sell it upstream, so that you can give your own elevator pitch about how things are working to your boss, who's gonna ask you a question in the elevator and things. And so I think really talking with our clients over time, we do an annual quantitative sort of survey, and we have the exact same questions every year. And so that's a good way for us to gauge how it's going. As things have become more measurable, we've added services over the years. And so a lot of times it happens that a client will say, can you start doing this for me as well? Can you start, you know, doing this thing? And so then a lot of times we'll start doing it for an internal client already before we roll it out across the board as an actual product or brand.
So you're building a use case for new service development.
We're building a use case, but then also, you know, we've always been fairly good at, and we've got a lot of team, we do a lot of internal sharing and things, so we've gotten pretty good at being able to say, what do we think the new things coming out are gonna be that are really important? And so we do a fair amount of working on different products for clients ahead of time and sort of building it out. But it's become much more structured, much more formalized. You know, I'm sort of a like race in and let other people behind me sort of figure it out, and you know, for worse, not for better. And you know, as I have transitioned out of the company more and more, they've gotten a lot better about building a full marketing plan and case and test and things. But again, I think that so much of it relies upon that relationship with your client and understanding that your client is part of your brand. It is not something you have sold to your client and your client has something different. They have become part of your brand, and your success is their success as well. And you have to always remember that you are not in competition with your client. Your client is not somebody who is somebody who you disagree with. You are constantly there to get, our sort of internal tagline is get your client their Christmas bonus. And so understanding that you're there for them and they have taken a chance on you as well. So I sort of answered your question.
No, I love it.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I think there's a certain element. Well, I'll give you the nuts and bolts first. Just building on what Nina said. I mean, I think that you have to proactively, especially as a founder, reach out to your prospects and your customers and just be very involved, just ensuring that they're getting the value relative to what you've sold them, right? It's not, you know, sign the contract, move on to the next one, right? I mean, you have to be very, very involved and understand how they're using things. You're going to get great insight from that, and you know, whether it's dinners or an advisory board or, you know, good communications to make them feel connected and informed. All that stuff is super, super critical, especially over time. Now I forgot what my other comment was going to be. But other than, I think early on, and this is definitely true in the software space. I guess I've been there for so long. It's just how I see the world is through the software space. You can be, I mean, take improv classes, right? And so especially when you have software, you can kind of be anything, you know? And people will ask for stuff that you're thinking, my software is not going to do that, you know? But I've seen the chief product officer for Salesforce be amazingly just adept at drilling into what the customer is trying to do, rather than just committing to here's what our product does. Sorry, it doesn't do that thing that you want it to do, you know? So just have to be adaptive, and it'll be on your product roadmap eventually, probably, but there's been plenty of small companies that have been built off of working with one big company who had a great idea that you could solve.
I'll just say, as a startup guy with all my businesses, the very first thing I do is go call who are the industry thought leaders. And in a LinkedIn world, you can find anybody. So if there's prolific bloggers and speakers, I instantly reach out. And I never try to sell them, hey, I've got a startup that's going to solve the planet's problems. I want to sell it to you. You call them and say, you're an industry thought leader. I've got a new idea. You're an expert. I would love your feedback. That will get you 9 more meetings than trying to sell people on stuff. And what I learned is, if they like your idea, you can say, you know, I'm building a startup advisory team. I'd love to have you on it. Maybe I'll give you a few stock options, or you can help, you know, guide. And most of these people are sitting right in the big companies, and they don't get to do entrepreneurial stuff, and this becomes an outlet for them to be able to be a participant with you and helping to, you know, build the featural and maybe identity part of the business. And it'll just, you know, that's the startup phase, which, by the way, then they go and start speaking about you, they start blogging about you, they start tweeting about you, they speak on client panels for you. And in all of my businesses, I've started with that, and then it's even grown to a place where we have a customer user group. We have 250 of our biggest customers, but we would pick the 20 top, like the Microsofts and the Salesforces, and we would do an annual review with them, where we'd fly them into Minnesota and say, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, you know, what's good, what's bad. We'd give each of them fake money, and we'd say, here's 20 things we're working on for the next year, and so you get to spend your little budget on the different features, and that was a great way to get the feedback from the customers about not only what we should build, but, you know, who should we be in the market? What problems should we solve that are adjunct to what you're doing? Because otherwise you can just get too utopian and try to, you know, do things you shouldn't be doing. But the voice of the customer is so good. At Jobs to Web, we became the first recruitment marketing platform. So what you were doing in email, we were doing over in recruiting. And there was trade shows where they would have, one was called ERE, Paul's back there. There was trade shows where 10 talks in a row that clients would be speaking. They would be mentioning Jobs to Web as their platform. And it got so bad that the owner of the conference had a private session with the customers and told them, please stop talking about this company, Jobs to Web, because it's making all the other vendors feel bad. Now, if you can get to a point where you're actually at that level of client advocacy, that is a good place to be. Wow.
Yeah. That's a great path to building that advocacy, to appreciate their thought leadership, to engage them in helping develop your services and products through that lens.
Yeah.
And then turning them into raving fans just really naturally. Yeah.
Well, so one add-on. So there's a great relational advocacy that you can get just by treating your customers great and having good software. But one of the mistakes I see people make a lot when they're in startups is they never really understand the value impact of the before and after of what they're selling. So for example, when we were working with a big retailer here in town, I was happy that they liked kind of what we could do for their strategy and powering their career site and how people could easily apply for jobs. But we were this smart enough to say beforehand, what's your cost per applicant? And their cost per applicant before us was $13 per applicant. And within 6 months of going live, anyone want to guess what their cost per applicant was? 3 cents.
Whoa.
And the average time to deliver a qualified candidate went from 6 weeks to 6 days. Now, if we wouldn't have known what the watermarks were before we started to do something, we would have never been able to have the after story to be able to integrate that into the value that we're generating. In almost every single one of my customers, because we made them not only, you know, deploy our brand, but understand the value of the vendor selection that they did, all got promoted. So almost every single one of them is now the VP of Global Talent for Starbucks and Microsoft. And they knew that if they came and worked with us, we not only would deliver a great product, but we would educate them and help them articulate and deliver the as far as you want.
Great. Authenticity, authentic. Authenticity is a word that gets tossed around a lot right now. I'm seeing it popping up in more and more articles. Maybe it's tied to a millennial generation, I'm not sure. But talk about what, if you're to look back on the life cycle of the brands that you've helped to lead along the way, what has authenticity actually meant or looked like, or in what place has it had in helping grow your businesses? Go for it, Don.
Go for it. Well, I mean, as I was listening about software businesses, I was thinking, like, I'm in such a different boat. We're in a different boat in that we're in a high contact business. I mean, we spend hours with our customers, if we can use that term, every day. And so the authenticity, I think, is, for us anyways, is, you know, behaving as a human being would, like as an individual would, as opposed to, because you can't hide behind a company. You know what I mean? Like, if I go out on the floor and I see someone who's a member, hi Paul, right? Long time member, you know, and Patrick right there. If I'm kind of a jerk, or if I just don't have time, or if I'm not relatable, then it's not working, you know? And now that's it might seem like not scalable, but so you have to think about how that shows up once you start doing marketing. And so, you know, with Jen's guidance here, we've been doing a pretty heavy load of content, content marketing. And the voice for that was really important, because we still have to relate as human beings who understand the struggle of the human beings who are our members. That's really what, you know, that's kind of what we're comfortable selling and what we feel we can get behind. It would be very different if we were, if we were 10 times as large, 100 times as large. Because obviously you can't pay off on that individual feel when you're, going to a large space where you don't know anybody. But so that's been my feeling. My instinct is almost always like, what would a human being do? What would, you know what I mean? Not a faceless company.
Right.
You know, so we never talk about policies if we can help it.
Yes.
You know.
And Nina, I appreciated what you wrote in the virtual panel blog. You talked about how, well, you can be authentic and be a total jerk, right? So,
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, the idea, if you're building a brand, your brand is probably gonna be something that is externally friendly, right? But I think it's kind of going back to your value system and what your value system is, and making sure that that is really strong and that really resonates with your clients, with yourself. You know, there's a lot of different reasons why you go into business, and you have to make sure that you remain true to it. You may go into business to make a lot of money. You may go into business because you have a cause you really believe in. There's a lot of different reasons. So you need to choose a value system that aligns with that, and then create an authentic brand around that. Otherwise, it's not going to remain true. And so it's sort of, it's a structure based, exactly as you said, off of what the human contact, what the needs are, and what your own value system system is going to be when you go in.
And in the social media landscape world that we all live in now, it's harder for brands to maintain a facade that's not real, because they will be called out in real time based on customer experiences, right? So one of the tools we use is something probably many of you in the room are familiar with, the Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, right? That start with why idea. What is the purpose? Like, what is the heartbeat of why your company exists? And then move out from there. You know, then how do you deliver it? What's your secret sauce? And you know, we talk about 3 uniques for the clients that we work with who run on traction through the entrepreneurial operating system, but those 3 uniques might be 3 things. Any one of them might not be unique to you in your competitive market, but take those 3 together and you have a potent differentiation in your competitive set. And then out from that is the what, right? The service or the product, what you actually sell, and that's going to change frequently. But hopefully, if you know your why and your purpose well, that doesn't change very much from day one to over the evolution of your brand. So that's a great anchor and a place for rooting that authenticity. So I have one last question, and then I want to leave time for some Q&A with the audience, and then a little extra time for networking as well. So my last question, and I would love for each of you to weigh in on this one, is that if you could give just one piece of brand-specific advice to an early-stage entrepreneur, what would that be?
What do you mean by brand specific?
Something relative to what it means to build a business that has a brand behind it. You know, as you think about how that business is going to express itself in the world and deliver an experience.
I think this kind of builds on what you were just saying, Jennifer, with Simon Sinek. I mean, there's another author that I think I've mentioned before, a local guy, Patrick Hanlon, wrote a book called Primal Branding, and he talks about the creation story. I mean, if you go to a Caribou Coffee, right, Kim and John Puckett still have the story about them going to the Denali and the wilderness of Alaska, and you know that kind of lives on, and they sold the business 15 years ago or something like that, you know. And the power of that story and the power of those values kind of lives on. And so when it moves beyond the founders, the first 20 people, how do you scale that? You know, because when you get to 50, 150, 10,000, maintaining that authenticity is really tough because everybody sees it slightly different through the lens that they have, and you need that. You need that core. You need that creation story to kind of ground every employee, and that's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Doug, what advice would you?
I would just say be your brand. I mean, keep it as simple as possible in the beginning, but if you're going to be brilliant or have good software or deliver great client results, be super committed to delivering that stuff. I mean, I can't tell you how many times clients called me, big customers, and said, your software is great, but your service sucks, right? And that's when the second S in SaaS is becoming more important than the first one. And we were over-invested in technology people and under-invested in service people. And if you're listening and if you're being your brand, you will get that kind of feedback. And so being accessible and always inviting customers. I mean, I would go visit all of our customers and I would say, please, 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 in a passive-aggressive world, if anything is going wrong, don't tweet it, call me. So I would give what I call the bat phone to all of my customers, and they felt comfortable picking up the phone and saying things are going horribly wrong, get on it. And it was just really, really important, especially in the early days of the business. I always say you can sell anything once, but you can sell anything once, but renewals are everything and expansion is everything. And invite your customers to be your co-innovators, your co-brand builders. Our customers love being able to call us and say, if you just did this, or if it just did that, and man, the minute you delivered that, I used to have a developer team that I called the F5 team. I don't know if you remember on your keyboard, you used to go on a website and hit F5, and it would change the web page. And I literally on the phone once had a customer telling me, if this button just did that, I'd be so happy. And I whispered to my F5 developer, because my guys would rotate, who was the F5 person. And I would say, can you get it to do this? He's like, clickety, clickety, click. And I got back to the customer and I said, hit F5. And they hit F5 and they're like, oh my God, you're genius, click. And they hung up the phone. But you know, that kind of stuff is the stuff that wins the emotional connection to your brand like you could never pay for in a marketing campaign or in a pitch, is being able to deliver that stuff. So just be true to that.
That's great. I'm probably doomed to to, stay in the space that's, almost more B2C than B2B. Because the more abstract that the business gets or the concept gets, the less I personally can, put myself into it. I almost have to see the people and see the effects and the positive outcomes. So my advice, if I was doing a startup, is to focus on the love over the science. Which is just to say, because if you don't have the personal passion for the thing you're doing, if you don't really feel like this is a thing that the world needs, then it's a little harder to get your first employee on board or to get an investor interested. And I'm not saying be crazy and have no business sense, because you need that as well. But you sure better, feel like this is the thing that, that the world needs, and that you're of all the things you could be spending your time on, this is the thing you're investing yourself in. I feel like that's how people lead, is by first the first one to make the sacrifice that they feel needs to be made.
Well, especially because you're gonna be spending 60 or 70 hours for 5 years doing it. So
Yeah.
it has to be something that you really love. I have 2 pieces of advice. The first one is not branding, it's more practical, and it's really bouncing off of what Doug was talking about a lot. I was saying it earlier, before you launch your own business, get all of your lines of credit set up. Because get your home equity line set up, get up all that stuff set up, because the minute you're out on your own, they're not gonna give you a loan. But, as you're still employed, so that's actually a really important practical piece of advice. And then the second one, the branding one, is don't name the business after yourself.
That's awesome. And last year I got to do another Twin Cities Startup Week marketing panel, and Clay Collins from Lead Pages was part of that panel. And I thought he gave some wonderful advice. I was literally just a couple months into launching my business, and the conversation was a little different, but when we asked the question of what advice would you give to the people in the room who are either early stage startups or maybe considering going out on their own, he said, do not start a business unless you cannot not start a business. Like, don't do it unless you cannot not do it, because then you know you need to do it. So, and that's about knowing that the world needs what you have, and you're ready to make that leap, take that risk, and then be really thoughtful. That's great advice. That's great practical advice for getting started. So, great, we've already got hands raised because we're transitioning to questions from the audience. Go in the back there.
Doug, so when you're doing sales calls, and then for as many product demos as you're doing in a day, a week, in a month, don't immediately give an answer. Do you have any idea how many you've done sales calls, product demos in these? Is it 100,000 now?
Easily.
Okay. How do you keep that fresh? How do you? You're in a new town, how do you keep those fresh, and how
I
do you
get
keep
bored with myself. I can't give the same pitch twice. I mean, so let me just say, I've never been satisfied in any of the companies to say, we've got the name right, we've got the pitch right, and everything's great. I've never been satisfied. It always can be better. And I think having that kind of passion is something that everybody loves. The big difference is you can either be the asshole founder that I'm the only guy that's got the story right, or you invite your whole team into it and actually admit that the people around you have valuable things to share, and that gives them ownership of the parts of it that they want.
Can I ask how many people in the room have a marketing background or have been a marketing leader for a startup? So many. That's awesome, because when you hear this conversation, does it make you just a little bit angsty knowing that you're the marketer following along the founder whose deck is going to get modified every single time they go pitch? And I remember being that, I started my career in sales, and so I owned the deck, and then I was a sales manager who still controlled the deck, and then I became the marketing leader, and then I started to get mad at the founder. I'm like, just stop it already. Like, we just had this nailed, and now you're asking me to change it again, and this tagline just went live. And I finally realized, and this is something I'm now coaching up-and-coming marketing leaders on, is that this is fabulous job security for a marketer. Like, we are never done telling this story. It's not going to stand still. It doesn't stand still. So you either, if you're part of a startup especially, where it's so iterative, you got to love it or leave it, because you're going to be following that founder and that sales team, just grabbing the bits and bytes that come off of them.
I'd say so long as the founder's improving it.
Exactly.
Good point.
Another question in the back?
First off, kudos to the panel. This is great content, so really appreciate it. And I wanted to dive a little deeper. I was happy to hear that there was some discussion around rebranding. My question is, our investment fund is in due diligence on an established company. The brand is very well established in the marketplace. They're looking at doing a rebrand for some new products that are coming to market. So as an investor and as our fund, what I'm very concerned about, of course, is any mistakes, any wasted money and so forth. So I'm wondering if the panel could share any insights around, as investors or, you know, as people who care about these business owners, what can they avoid or mistakes or anything that we should be aware of, especially as we're going through a rebranding exercise?
Well, you know, we've done rebranding exercises because, of course, it was named after me, and I didn't think I was going to grow. And we actually talked to a bunch of, you know, to a bunch of potential investors and buyers and various things along the way, and we decided that it was actually less risky that it was more risky to change the name than to keep the name, because a number of the different potential investors said, we would want, you've got an established brand, at least in Minnesota, and so that might be part of what we'd be buying. And that doesn't quite answer your question, but a little bit. And so we decided not to rebrand, and someday we'll probably sell the company, and to wait to let whoever buys us decide what they want to do with it. That did not quite answer your question, so hopefully somebody else can answer the rest of it.
I got one hazard that we experienced in our rebrand, and Nina's company could help you with this.
Sure, I know, you're going now.
We unfortunately didn't shop for that level of talent. But when you can take a massive SEO hit on a rebrand if you don't do it right. So I would think as an investor, I'd want to know that the team has vetted that part of the process, and that they're aware of what it'll take to transition and you know, try to retain as much you know, search equity as possible.
And there are ways to do it, you're right.
Yeah.
We've done it with a number of companies, both big and little.
So you know who to call now.
Yeah.
I would say, if you're investing in a business, more than likely you're also trying to story them up or move them up market, right? And in that kind of if they're just changing their name to change their name, I wouldn't encourage it. If they're changing their name to represent a bigger market, a bigger value proposition, a better identity, then that's really worth looking hard at. Especially if the business has been around for 3-5+ years, you say it's got some momentum, because by that time, frankly, internal people are usually tired or worn out by the old brand, and giving it a new wind in its sails can actually be really positive internally as well as externally. But I would never pick a rebranded name if, especially as an investor, you didn't look at the name and go, that's a way better name, right? If it's 5% better, I wouldn't do a thing. If it's 50% or better and it's a no-brainer and the story naturally is told from it and the pitch gets an upgrade, it's worth gold. So,
Thank you.
So my question is around using this Made in Minnesota message in your branding. And to give you more context, I'm in the new parents retail space, and you know, I also have a home equity line, so I have a limited amount of budget. And my thinking is, you know, I could just, you know, like a tech company kind of aim nationwide, and kind of the message will dilute, or just use this, like, you know, made my Minnesota parents for Minnesota parents message. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts around that.
You have to get traction somewhere first, you know. And so if you feel like you have traction here and it's a story that can go beyond, I would do it quickly, you know. If you're able to, you know, because you're essentially, if you're in a semi-competitive business, is it B2C or is it B2B?
B2B defined.
Yeah, B2B defined, yeah. You know, those stories start to get told in other cities too, you know, I think is kind of what we found. And if you have a connection into, I mean, don't go nationwide, but like pick a city or two where you think you can make an impact. It's probably in the Midwest, and tell the story there too.
Well, and my suggestion would be, think downstream as you make today's story. Because maybe today your market is regional, but maybe that changes shape, and you don't want to have to unravel too much of the story in order to expand beyond a region. So I'll use my business as an example. When we started 1.5 years ago, I knew that we would spend our first 2 to 3 years in this market building face-to-face relationships with clients where I could be deeply involved on all the pitches, validate the model, and then once it's, you know, quote, perfected or tested and proven and process driven, then we can expand. So we've been careful about taking our sales and marketing approach to specifically focus focus on this region, but not limiting ourselves from being able to expand outside of this region as the model evolves.
I sort of think about something like Land O'Lakes model, right? Okay, so farm to table, really big deal right now, and people want to know, okay, these eggs came from this farm right over here, and so it is sort of this localized model. But you look at somebody like Land O'Lakes, who's been around for a really long time, and their model is, it is independent, it's an independent cooperative. So they are independent different farms, so they can still remain on brand on this farm to table type thing, but they can still be nationwide in that way. So maybe it's around that sort of that first model, 5 parents, 4 parents type of thing. But then there's also the benefit of being a very simple niche thing, as you were saying in the beginning, the very niche. I was tactical in the beginning. All I did was tactical work. And proudly in the sea of strategic people. So having that thing in the beginning can help before you spread out further.
Let's do maybe one more question from the audience, and then we'll open it up for a little time to mix and mingle. And I think Bob's hand went up first there.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Going back to when you started up your business, there obviously had to be a time when you went after big business. Nina, you had mentioned like going after Red Wing. Is there a point that you recommend you wait before you go after a big business, or do you run into the issue of you're too small to deal with us?
My experience in working with the big companies is it can be very difficult, depending on how much resource you have in the beginning. Because you go do business with Best Buy or Target, you can't just show up and insert a small thing on the website without having a $30,000 insurance policy, without having SLAs, without having $10,000 worth of legal documentation, and it can be very, very detrimental if you're not willing or able to meet some of the requirements of just simply working with some of the bigger companies. So doing SMB or mid-market kinds of things where you don't have that. But what I would say is most importantly, having a solid sponsor, no matter what size company, someone who loves what you're doing, will sponsor you, will help you solve those problems, your early adopter, right? Your lighthouse client person that's gonna help you even work through the glitches of your first go-to-market is probably a little more valuable than just worrying about what size company you go after. I think making sure you find the right customer that has done. I would even make sure they've interview them, make sure they've worked with a startup or a company and helped work through the issues to make sure you have a successful deployment is probably more important than the size of company. But infrastructure wise, if you're gonna go after big markets and that's where you're gonna go, you just gotta be, it requires a lot.
Well, and I would chime in. Oh, sorry, Chip.
No, I was gonna say, what I said before, if you have the ability to network into bigger companies, start so early, and just kind of remember the way I think about it is, it isn't Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft itself is a set of teams and people that are trying to solve specific problems. And so you might be able to solve a problem, but with, for a smaller team. With what Doug is saying, I mean, we're going through that now with a large
SOC
company in town. SOC compliance, right? As you move up, security and stability and all. I'm in the software space again now. That becomes more and more important, and it feels like the right thing to do, but it's hard fought when you move up market.
Basically, a big company can bury you, and whether that's through. I mean, we once had
especially if you're successful with them.
Exactly.
Because then they want to bring you into more and more stuff.
I was thinking about the other end of it. If you're not, I mean, they have a team of lawyers who would love to do nothing more than to blot you out of existence. But also the politics, what it takes to navigate the number of meetings it takes. For a long time, we were trying to court some, bigger corporate players to do some various things, and what we found was, for us to ultimately deliver what was a fairly simple service, and with maybe not the hugest margins in the world, we had to do so much courtship with them because everybody's risk averse. And we're like, look, it's a really simple proposition, but nonetheless, you can my manager, come in and talk to my manager. And it just went on forever. We realized we can't even afford to sell this product to these people because what they need as the sales product process that they need to be on the receiving end of is more than we can deliver. So we cut ourselves off from that. Now that can change over time as you maybe find you create a dedicated resource to go and do that work, have those conversations.
for huge enterprise companies, and so, you know, and that means like well over, like in like tens and hundreds of billions of dollar companies, those ones, it can become an issue in terms of the process. So if you're in a services business, you may end up needing to do 6 final presentations when you have budgeted for 1 final presentation. And so that's just something about thinking about what that process may take. There's a lot more people who have to get involved. There's a lot more team members and things, and you need to make sure that you can service all of them. So that's just something to think about in terms of that. And then all of the different things you need, you know, you need to have much higher sort of processes and stringent types of things. And then again, that sometimes you work with a huge enterprise, but they have so many small little groups who might have tiny budgets that you think, oh, we're getting into this huge enterprise, it's gonna be great. And then you realize you're actually dealing with a ton of tiny budgets that are actually smaller than you can, that is efficient for you to work with. But you know, that being said, there's big pros and cons to each.
And I'll weigh in with the last point from the professional services side of the world, which is where I've always participated, and from startup and growth companies, is that, you know, you got to think about the long-term health of your business. As a startup and early stage company, it might be attractive to think that if we secure this, you know, high-end enterprise logo to our client list and a 6-figure gig, now we can scale and can fund our growth. But I've seen so many businesses that we work with who have gotten themselves wildly out of balance because 80% of their revenue is tied up in 2 client accounts, and that represents a huge amount of their staff and their headcount. And if one of those accounts goes away, which could happen any day because they're big and can make quick pivots that don't affect them but could kill your business. So as an example, our business sells to the $5 to $50 million business, and we have 2 core offerings, fractional CMOs and coach and strategist, and we're not an agency. We have a standalone project level engagement for messaging that does fit enterprise small pockets that have that need. We can serve them. When it comes to us reactively, we'll take that business because we know it represents exact specific revenue that we can control on a project basis, and we're not looking to proactively chase that business till we have enough, you know, solid, healthy, sustainable business at this level. And when you sell to the SMB market, the beautiful thing about that is even if the logos aren't quite as recognizable to the broader world, I get to sell right to the CEO and there's no procurement involved. So quick decisions, great feedback right from the client stakeholders. So there's pros and cons both ways, but it's just important to think about the viability and the upfront requirements to be engaged and the long-term health to your business. So I think we could go on for days here and keep chatting. So I just want to close out with a few quick comments. I want to thank again our panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you so much for just sharing your real stories and lessons learned along the way. Another thanks to my team at Authentic Brand for all their support in putting this together, our hosts at Fueled Collective, and Heibrid Marketing for helping us broadcast this to those who couldn't be here today. Please stick around. There's an open invitation to co-work, so you might want to set up shop in some of the open space. There's a lot of food. Please eat some fruit and grab a pastry. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to be with you.